Once I had all the measurements written down, I pulled up my Pinterest board, which can be kind of dangerous. So you can see this is where it's joined up. Hello again and welcome back to the vlog. We are back in the office and we are going to start working on building the cabinet doors and the drawer front. I'm going to be building 6 doors and 1 drawer front to finish this side of the cabinets off. The first thing I need to do is measure my openings. If you remember in some of the last videos, I mentioned I was going to do an inset door. Inset doors will be totally flush with the front of the face frame. So they won't sit on top of it, they will be in line with it, which means we need to measure the inside opening of the face frame and then subtract a little bit so we have a nice even gap all the way around the doors. Now I'm also doing double doors, so I will have 2 doors side by side instead of 1 big door over the whole opening. So I will need to account for the little gap that needs to fall between the 2 doors so we can easily open and close them. Now, if I did a good job building these, the measurements should be pretty square, or at least within a 1/16 of an inch. So I'm going to get my measuring tape and my sketchbook. I will take all my measurements and draw up a little sketch, and then I will work on calculating how much material we need to build the cabinet doors and drawer front. Sorry I look a little bit orange. I have a lamp in this corner here because I've been working in this room and I wanted some better light. So I'm a bit glowy, but we've got all of our measurements down. So I basically drew a sketch of the cabinets and then I wrote down all the measurements as I took them, both the length and the width of each of the openings. Then I calculated how big each door needed to be with a 1/16 inch gap all the way around it. So there was a little bit of math involved and I used my trusty fraction calculator. I will leave a link to that app in the description because I use it all the time. It's super handy when you're calculating fractions if you can't do them in your head like me. Then what I did was I wrote out my cut list. So we have the finished size of the doors, but we need to cut a few pieces to create the frames and the inside panel for each of those doors. If you're looking at a cabinet door and you see the frame, it's actually 4 pieces of wood connected together to create that outside frame. The vertical pieces of the frame are called stiles. The horizontal pieces of the frame are called rails. The rails sit inside of the stiles, so the stiles are the full height of the door, and the rails are the width minus the thickness of the stiles. So for me, I'm going to use 1x2 pieces of wood. They're 1.5 inches wide on each side, so I would subtract 3 inches to get the width of my rail. That was a mouthful. I definitely had to do that a few times. Once I had all the measurements written down, I pulled up my Pinterest board, which can be kind of dangerous because then ideas start flowing. And I was trying to figure out how other people handled the drawer front when the drawer front wasn't very tall. My drawer front is only 5 inches. That's not a very deep drawer. And if I have a frame and then put a little panel in between it to create a drawer front, that inside panel is going to be teeny weeny. So sure, you can do it, but it kind of looks awkward when you add a handle or a pull to it. So I was thinking, what if I did a solid drawer front? Just totally solid piece of wood, there's no frame, and we just put the handle right on the solid piece. We only have 1 drawer, so I'm not really worried about what this will look like on a larger scale. And I will pop a picture here of an example of what it looks like when you see the solid drawer front paired with the framed out cabinet doors. I kind of like it. It's a little bit different and it makes my life easier. It's 1 less frame I need to build. The other thing I was reminded of that I saved were these glass front cabinets with curtains behind them. So I will pop a picture here so you can visualize what that looks like because it's kind of hard to describe. But I forgot that this is another fun way to incorporate pattern. The other thing that I love about this is if I get sick of a pattern or if I want to switch things up for the seasons, all I need to do is sew a different curtain and I can change up the whole look of the cabinets. It's a slightly different build. We still have to build the frame of the doors the same way, but we need to break the router out to create a little lip edge that we can set the cut glass in, and that way it's flush on the back. So I think we're gonna do it, you guys. This project is all about stepping out of my comfort zone, using tools I haven't used before, building things I haven't built before, trying colors in new ways. And at this point, the project has already taken so long, I'm not that worried about extending the timeline a little bit. I want to walk in this room and just love it and never want to leave, for better or worse. And I'm also the type of person that just really enjoys changing things up, and that will give me the opportunity to do that and not feel so locked into certain patterns or colors. I will probably only do that treatment for the upper doors. I will do standard cabinet doors for the two that fall underneath the drawer, just to switch it up. And I like that it kind of creates a solid base for your eyes, so visually the weight is at the bottom, and then it gets kind of like light and airy as you look up and go towards the ceiling. All of that said, we've got a lot of planning to do. I've got some supplies to order. I might be able to start cutting some of this wood this week, but with this slight pivot, it will take a little bit longer, but I promise it's going to be worth it, and I'm really excited to explore a totally different style for the doors. Today we are out in the barn and I'm going to work on cutting down all of the pieces we need to assemble our cabinet doors. I first went to Lowe's to get 1x2 poplar, and I know that Home Depot and Lowe's wood is just not the best quality. It's fine for a lot of projects, and most of the time that's where we go. But for something like this where it really needs to be precise, I knew I wasn't gonna find the best quality wood. So I ended up getting the 5 best pieces that I could find, but it just didn't sit right with me. And I knew that I was gonna have a lot more work ahead of me cleaning things up and sanding to really make them work the way I wanted to. I don't have a planer, I don't have a joiner, so I'm somewhat limited in what I can do with wood from a store like that. So I put my big girl pants on this morning and I drove to the lumberyard super early to go see what they had. They did not have 1x2 poplar, but they did have 1x4. And what you can do is rip down 1x4s to 1x2s. This actually works in my favor because when you build a cabinet door, you're building with pairs of stiles and rails, right? So your stiles are the exact same height and your rails are the exact same width. If I do all my cross cuts on the 1x4, it's wide enough that I can cut 2 pieces out of each slice of wood. So I can cut it to length and then rip it down in half, and that will give me a pair of stiles or rails that are the exact same height because it was coming from the same board. So lesson learned, go with your gut. There's always a reason for it. If I was feeling a little weird about something, it was because there was a better solution. So I'm going to get set up on the miter saw, start taking my measurements, and cut down all these boards so that we can then move on to the table saw and rip them in half. Okay, so I just cut these 2 pieces down, and obviously they're wider than we need. So now when I cut these in half, I will have essentially a matching pair of stiles that I can use to create the cabinet door. Now when we assemble it, we know that our pairs are matching lengths, so that will ensure our doors are square. We now have a nice big stack of all of the stiles and rails cut to length, Now I need to rip each of these pieces down in half to get our 1.5 inch thick boards. So I'm gonna set the fence to 1.5 inches from the blade, and then we're gonna run each of these through. It's not dead center. We'll actually have a little bit of spare on one of the edges. So each piece of wood will be run through the saw twice. So we have 2 matching pieces that are 1.5 inches wide. Before I go ahead and cut all of those boards, I just have a scrap piece here that I'm going to run through first to make sure I have my measurements right. Then we'll run all of them through in one sweep. All of the frame pieces are now cut. That was really satisfying. The offcuts were these perfect little slivers of wood that are like nice and floppy, and they make a lovely sound. I'm probably gonna save these. Normally I would trash them, but they're really good for shims. So I'm gonna save these in my little shim box for future projects in case I need extra. So now that that's done, I need to cut the drawer front face. I was originally going to build the drawer front just like I am the cabinet doors, but once I realized that it's pretty short, and if you add that frame, the center panel is going to be like less than 1 inch tall, it just didn't make sense. I randomly have a piece of 1x6 poplar. I must have grabbed that when I was doing all the face frame just in case I needed it. But since I still have it and it works size-wise for the drawer front, I'm just going to do a cross cut and a rip cut and cut that down to size. You all have the benefit of movie magic, so I've cut the board and it's cut to size. There are some little knots and imperfections in the board, so I will just do a little bit of wood filling and sand it so it's perfectly smooth, and that way when we apply paint to it, you'll never know there were these little imperfections. Next, what I need to do is cut the groove in the cabinet frame pieces that are going to have a solid panel. So if you remember when I talked about how in the upper doors I want to do glass, and then in the lower doors I'm going to do a solid wood panel, the doors with glass are going to be built differently because I'm not going to slide the glass in like I would the wood panel. I'm actually going to route out a groove on the inside of the cabinet door frame that I can drop the glass into and hold it in place with clips. The reason I'm going to do it that way is because if I change my mind in the future and I decide I don't want glass doors anymore, I want to replace it with a wood panel, I can just take the clips off, take the glass insert out, and then glue in a solid panel, or even just like put the clips back in to hold a solid wood panel in. The bottom doors will have a solid panel that sits in a groove and is glued in place. So if I wanted to put glass in those doors, we'd essentially have to rip it apart and build new doors. So all that said, I only have to cut a groove down the center of 8 pieces of wood because we're only doing it for the 2 bottom doors. All the grooves are cut. I tested the piece of plywood again just to make sure we didn't need to make any adjustments, and everything is good to go. The last thing we need to do on these pieces with the groove before we can actually dry fit them, before gluing them all together, is cut the tenons. So the way these all hook together essentially is we cut a tenon on this side that fits into this groove. So I can insert the tenon into that groove and glue them together nice and tight. So now what we need to do is remove material from the outsides so there's that center piece left, which is called the tenon, and then we can slide it right in. The cabinets with the glass will be assembled differently. I'm going to use dowels to assemble the corners. So I'll use my doweling jig to center the holes. I'll drill holes on both sides of the wood. I'll glue in little dowels. They're just like 1.5 inches or so long, and then we will put the dowel into the hole and glue the whole thing together. It works very similarly to the tenons. The difference is we don't need this big long center groove for the glass because I'm not sliding the glass between the wood. It's just going to sit on a groove on the inside of the cabinet door, so we don't need to go through the effort of doing all of that. I just put the dado stack back in and I set it to a 1/2 inch, so it's a 1/2 inch thick now. So that will cut the length of the tenon that we need. And then I raised the height of the blade to just underneath the groove. We only want to cut up to the groove and that's it, so that the tenon we leave in the middle fits perfectly in this groove we created. Tenons are all cut, they fit in the grooves. It's like 95% perfect, which is good enough for me. And I just did a dry fit of one door to make sure everything kind of like fits together nicely. I'm not going to glue anything up yet because I need to sand everything before I assemble it. It's much easier to sand everything first and then put it together and just do kind of like, you know, touch-up sanding. The last thing I need to do before we can like glue everything up aside from sanding is drill the holes for the dowels. My goal is to get to that tomorrow if I can figure out how to get it all to work. And then next up is sanding and gluing. Hello again, we are back in the barn. I have spent all day running around to different stores trying to make sure I have what I need, testing, drilling holes for this dowel situation, and my oh my, it is not as simple as the video I watched made it seem. I don't know if I have shoddy jigs or if it's just the nature of it or what, but it took me several tries to get this to align somewhat properly, and even then it's not perfect, which is frustrating. But I don't think I have any other way of assembling the doors with the glass, so I think we just need to do the best we can with what I have, and I can sand down any little imperfections. The imperfections aren't that bad, it's just like tiny little lip edges that aren't aligning when they're next to each other, so I'll just sand those smooth and it'll be fine. But I have 3 self-centering jigs, I have different dowels, different bushings. I tried a combination of things. I wanted to see if it was the jig itself, and I have 3 of them, so it's definitely not the jig. I just don't know, but we are moving forward. I'm not going to let this be a blocker, and we're going to try to get the holes all drilled today. This contraption here is the self-centering doweling jig. So it basically has this plate in the middle with holes in it, and then it has these adjustable bushings, so you can unscrew these to change the size drill bit you want to fit through there. They have 2 side by side, so you can drill 2 of the same size holes right next to each other, which is perfect for our scenario where we need 2 dowels. The other thing it does is it centers this middle plate between these 2 outside plates when you clamp it. So this right here is just a handle, so I put my piece of wood in there like that, and then I just twist the handle and it centers these holes. Now, the centering part isn't quite perfect, so that's where it's causing a little bit of trouble, but we're doing the best we can. You can't really see in the camera, but in this little hole here, there are 2 white lines. So once you clamp your piece of wood, you can use a pencil to mark where those lines are. Once you have those lines marked and you drill the holes, you take it off. You take the piece you just drilled and you match it up with the corresponding piece, and you just transfer those lines over. That's how you basically know that the 2 sets of holes are going to align when you put a dowel in it. Now, it's not perfect, but like I said, it's close enough for me, and you know, it's all a learning process. I'm sure there are tricks to this, but I am A, impatient, and B, I don't have any more time this week to get this done. So with that, let's get things drilled. joined up. If I kind of separate it, you can see where the dowels are. So when I squeeze it together, obviously we'll add glue in there, but I'll just need to sand these little seams so that they're nice and smooth. But all in all, pretty darn square. I'm going to go ahead and drill the rest of the holes. Fingers crossed everything goes smoothly, and then I will show you when they're all dry fit. All 4 of the glass cabinet door frames are now dry fit. I left this corner open so you can see how the dowels kind of just like squeeze together like that. So obviously there's a little bit of filling and sanding we will need to do to get these perfectly smooth, but in general, everything went okay. I'm going to try to get one of them sanded and glued up right now, just as a test, so that I have a good process for the rest of them. The lower doors that have the solid wood panel can't be glued together until I have the panel cut, because I have to glue it and slide the panel in before I put the last piece of the frame together. The doors with the glass can all be assembled without the glass because the glass is going to be set in and attached from the back inside, so the frame can be completely finished before we go ahead and do that. I just brought one of the frames over here. I'm going to take it apart, take the pegs out, and just sand all of the surfaces of the 4 pieces of the frame, and then I will set up for gluing. I brought all my sanded pieces over here and my dowel pins, so I'm going to put glue in each of the holes, stick the pins in, and then clamp everything together nice and tight so it dries like that. I'm hoping it doesn't like curl up when I clamp it, so I'm going to be really conscious of how tight I'm clamping it and what it's looking like from the side. I'm going to try it with just one door first, and then once we figure out the best plan, we can apply that to the rest of the doors. I made a right flippin' mess with the glue, but they're all glued up, they're all clamped, all the dowel pins are in place, and now we just wait. So I tightened these up, and then I just put like a little shim in the middle there because I really wanted to make sure it wasn't gonna cup. I want to make sure it's flat, and for some reason this one just to my eye looked like it was cupping a little bit, so I'm kind of putting pressure on that middle point to keep it level. Once the glue is dry, I will unclamp it and inspect it. I'm hoping it will be fine. We will have some sanding and filling to do, but that will happen after all of the doors are glued up. So assuming this door goes well, I will follow the same process for the rest of the glass cabinet doors. The other 2 doors will be a little bit different because I need to cut the panel before I glue it, but once I have the panel inserted, I can glue it all up and clamp it just like these. As much as I would love to glue up all of the doors tonight, I'm using this sample door as an excuse because I am leaving on a trip tomorrow and I have packed nothing. So I need to get moving on that. I'm going to wrap the vlog up here. We will pick up next week where we left off with gluing up the doors and getting everything assembled. I sent an estimate request to our local glass company to get an estimate on the glass inserts, so hopefully I'll get that answer soon, and maybe if we're lucky they'll be able to get it to us next week or the week after. I've also ordered hinges for the doors and the glass clips. So all of the pieces are starting to come together. It's just a matter of how quickly they get here. If we don't get all of the hardware next week, then potentially if we can get everything glued up, I might be able to get them all painted. So we'll play it by ear. Thank you so much for watching this week. If you liked the video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe for future updates, and I will catch up with you in the next vlog.